Imagine sports hijacked by a few all-star juggernauts, where rivalries die, young talent rot on benches, and cash-rich giants build by endless titles, leaving fans bored and leagues hollow. Honorable Judge, this house stands firmly for, this house believes that super teams do more harm than good. Because they crush fair play, widen money gaps, and stunt the next generation. Let me first start by defining our side. A super team is a team formed by deliberately stacking multiple star players, often from different teams, creating a roster with a disproportionately high chance of winning. Note that we don't believe that this applies to Olympic teams and international country teams where purpose is to have the best players from your country. Super teams use incentives such as money and craftily restrictive contracts to gain and keep players on their team. Done more harm than good means that when we look at the overall impact on sport, including competition, fans, and long-term development, the negatives outweigh the positives. This debate is not about banning players from moving teams. It is about evaluating whether the rise and normalization of super teams have been beneficial for sport as a whole. Our burden is to show that super teams significantly damage these areas. Opposition must prove that entertainment and player freedom outweigh systemic harm. Now I would like to move on to my first substantive. Super teams kill competition by hoarding all the top talent, turning what we were once exciting leagues into boring repeats where only a few stacked squads ever win. When superstars flock onto the same team,
QI.
declined. Massive imbalances, playoffs become predictable blowouts dominated by the same powerhouse year after year, draining fan excitement and viewership. Other teams can't compete without equal access to elite players, so rivalries fade, upsets vanish, and the whole league feels completely rigged. This isn't just less fun. It shrinks the sport's popularity as casual fans tune out the lack of drama. Imagine a pro cricket league where all three superstar, all-rounders, world-class batsmen who also bowl far demand trades to the same powerhouse franchise. Overnight, the team steamrolls every opponent with massive 100-run victories and unchaseable totals, which while the other squad limp around with an average lineups and crash out in early payoffs. Fans of underdog
QI.
declined. Fans of underdog teams ditched the stands and TVs, and crowds thin out. Broadcast ratings nosedive, and IPL-style tournaments become a dull procession. Now I would like to move on to my second substantive. Super teams create unfair financial advantages. Super teams are rarely built on skill alone. They're built on big markets, sponsorship pull, and financial power. This creates a feedback loop. Winning attracts money, money attracts and stars guarantee winning. Smaller teams cannot compete on these terms, no matter how well they manage. This turns the sport into who can afford to win, not who plays the best. That undermines the spirit of fair comparison. Picture this in sports. A big city franchise swimming in TV revenue and mega sport sponsor deals outbids everybody
QI.
to I will not be taking any POIs. Outbids everyone to hoard elite athletes, forging a relentless dynasty that flattens rivals year in, year out. Meanwhile, a hardworking small market team, fueled by clever drafts and local grit, fights valiantly but gets crushed in the cash war, unable to lure top stars no matter their strategy. Each win for the giant reels in more money, more millions to fuel the talent grab, dooming underdogs to perpetual rebuilds. My third and final substantive is about super teams harm player development and league depth. So third super teams damage talent development. So when young stars cluster together, young players get fewer opportunities, and role players are overshadowed. Development pipelines weaken. Instead of growing across the league, talent becomes centralized, unutilized, and blocked. This reduces depth of competition, quality of mid-tier teams, and future stars emerging. Sports thrive when talent is distributed, not hoarded. For example, when the Warriors stacked Stephen Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, and Kevin Durant, young players got limited minutes and narrow roles, while mid-tier teams across the league became much less competent and competitive. And talent was concentrated and blocked, slowing development and reducing depth, showing why sports thrive when talent is distributed, not hoarded. In the opposition's world, a few teams dominate. Most teams exist to lose, and fans disengage over time. In proposition's world, competition is real. More teams have hope. Fans across the league stay invested. So, honorable judge, super teams may look impressive, but they come at a cost. They destroy competitive balance, alienate fans, harm development, and undermine fairness. When we look beyond highlights and trophies, it becomes clear that super teams have done more harm than good. For these reasons, the proposition proudly supports this motion. Thank you.
Fans do not fall in love with sport because everyone is equal. They fall in love with the highest level of competition in itself. Therefore, this debate is about protecting the quality and competitiveness of the sport. As a leader of opposition, I will do three things in my speech. Firstly, provide some recharacterization. Secondly, provide some rebuttals towards opposition side's two main points. And finally, explain the mechanisms of our two main arguments. So, I'll only be providing one piece of recharacterization. We do not believe that there's only one super team in this entire sport. In most sports, there are several extremely good, talented players that will comprise of more than one team. This leads to more good teams that go head to head, and we believe that this is the premise that the debate should be under. Now moving on to the rebuttals. The first argument they have given us is that it will hoard all competitiveness and the super teams will make all of these matches really boring. However, we believe that domination is sometimes the exact case in which the sports become more popular and powerful because the audience is more interested in seeing how these teams dominate, what are their tactics, therefore to gain more insight. B, we believe that this, even if they do dominate, this will make other teams even more motivated to surpass those teams. And even if they do not have the same level of financial need, I will now like to move on to the second piece of rebuttal as to why the financial imbalance that they have tried to convince you of is not true. We believe that this simply does not make any sense. When the super team is created, obviously the audience will be really curious into seeing how these talented players who have different skill sets collaborate together, how they will do against other teams. And therefore, overall TV broadcast is increased. Sponsorships in all teams is also increased, and the audiences make the overall sport a lot more popular, I will now explain on in my two substantive arguments. So, firstly, how do super teams advance the sport overall on multiple levels? First layer to this argument is that super teams obviously increase the quality of play. When these super teams bring together all the best players who have superior skills, they have a deep tactical understanding, they have more experience at the highest level. When these players play together, the speed of the game increases, strategies become more complex, and that simply makes the games more enticing to watch. So what is the impact of this? We believe that these higher quality matches can attract more fans because these fans are more likely to watch games that are more intense and skillful and unpredictable at the tactical level. We also believe that these star players bring more existing fan bases and international attention to the sport. Therefore,
Point
as
of
viewership
information, madam.
ratings increase and the stadium attendance grows. I will take the PL later. Secondly, we believe that more fans obviously lead to more sponsorships and money. When higher viewerships and attendance to larger broadcasting deals, increased sponsorships and higher merchandise sales, leagues that have more financial resources to improve. This money strengthens the entire sport, not just these super teams, because leagues often redistribute revenue through shared broadcasting income, and plus this funding supports both youth academics, training facilities, coaching, education and smaller or developing teams. We believe that this impact is huge as it increases overall competitiveness, and even if other teams are matches are not exciting to watch, this increases the overall popularity of the sport, meaning that other teams can be put in the spotlight as well, allowing more fans to potentially expand their range and choose their favorite team. I'll take a POI if there's any.
Um, when we play college football, we watch it because it has a high level of competition, not because the players are good. If what you're saying is true, then why would people still watch college football? Why would people still watch little leagues? So is sports still meaningful if hope only exists for a few?
Well, I believe that is completely false because when a team specifically dominates, and even in your case, when these teams are more equally distributed, we believe that yes, those are popular. But however, let's just give an example then. One of the clearest examples out there are F1 or motorsports in general, right? So even when teams like Mercedes or Red Bull or Ferrari start dominating, that does not make the sport any less boring to watch. It only attracts more attention for the sport with new fans coming in because of the new innovation. And even if the competition is, for example, really boring, we believe that I would now like to prove why it is still worth it for the individual players. Now, this moves on to my second substantive argument about how this gives more opportunity for talented players to shine. We believe that these athletes obviously have short careers, they have a high risk of injury, and they have a limited chance to win titles in a team that is not on the same level. Like any professionals, any field, they want the best working conditions, strong teammates, effective leadership, and staying in a team that does not help them reach their ambitions is simply unfair. For example, some player in the Chinese soccer team might be a lot more talented than the rest of their team, and they're simply limited from the success that they deserve. The second layer to this is that this freedom leads to better performance. When these players fit into teams that fit their style and level of ability, they're able to train harder, they're more motivated, and they can learn from equally elite teammates. This results in improved individual performance and even stronger team execution. The third layer to this is that we believe that this higher standard spreads across the league. Other teams are forced to respond by improving scouting, upgrading coaching, investing in youth development. So even if elite players gain in the short term, we believe that the performance games can inspire and have more systematic improvement for everyone. This long-term quality and sustainable ability of the sport will outweigh concerns about whatever these equal outcomes are. We believe that while competitive balance may be reduced in the short term, the long-term health reach will improve because these sports exist for fans, future players, society at a large, systems, and we believe that systematic growth outweighs short-term inequality, even if it does occur. There is a reason why domination across sports leagues change, and even if they are a specific team that dominates for a really long time, we believe that there's still going to be other rising talents from other sports, and we believe that this engagement will still allow all the teams to gain more fame and money, which they desperately need. Because this debate, even if it doesn't boil we believe that in this debate, even if inequality in this results does occur, we believe that the funds that are given to these other teams is much more important for their survival. So for all the reasons above, please give the ballot to Op.
When unknown variables exit the realm of these competitive sport matches is when viewers start to lose engagement, and it is when these sports teams suffer. A few things in the speech. Firstly, I will rebut, and then I will secondly go on to my clash point on how clubs face backlash. Okay, firstly, opposition says that it creates a high level of competition which breeds engagement. This is their main point. A few things that we disputed with them on. Firstly, they said there's not only probably going to be one super team. Why is this not true? It is highly unlikely because the people who are building these super teams probably want to have the most stacked players as they can. To be a super team, you basically need the best players from throughout the league on your team. We believe probably the most there'd be is 2, because that is the amount of high quality players available before it just basically becomes the sports league itself is all super teams because all the players in the league are good, and that sort of just falls out. Okay, another thing they said was that the audience likes to watch these sports, and they want to watch it because they want to see the high skill level. It's quite important to note here that the sort of people who are watching sport are watching it for a few reasons. One, to see who will win because they invested possibly they've gambled on it because there's a variable that either team or that they're just very interested to see who will win, or they have an investment in one side of the team, or it's one of those big matches where 2 very strong teams are up against each other, or 2 very iconic members are clashing. You just remove this when one, people who are supporting their own team, this is now happening at probably a worse quality because another good team has snatched up all the good players. You've removed that variable of will this team win or lose because you very clearly have a team that you know is going to win. You also lose these hyped up matches because you don't have these very good players spread across these leagues. This also looks sure, you might have 2 super teams that go up against each other, but that's only one big match compared to usual sports teams like soccer and basketball, who have multiple very iconic matches throughout a season. Sure, people watch sport because they want to see very skilled people, but they want to see very skilled people who are at a match level go up against each other. This looks how people don't want to see a regional team go up against the Olympic team because it would be a complete and ultimate walkover. So this creates harm. They also said that this talent would spread across. Why won't this talent spread across? First of all, people lose hope that they will beat a team, and they then begin to like not try in an attempt to like not hurt themselves, to like push themselves to an unrealistic limit. But secondly, there are probably just like less funds and investments into the not as good teams, specifically because they are not as good and like they're not like getting watched as much as the super team. So it's things like the super teams that are going to get investment and going to get buy-in and going to get revenue. This does not spread across. It actually probably centers revenue that would be spread across directly into the super team because they are probably the only team that is going to get watched. And even if other teams get watched, it will be because of loyal followers, and it's just like more harm. I'll take a POI before I move on.
You keep on saying that super teams are harmful, but harmful compared to what? A perfectly equal league that never produces excellence with the actual world where dominance pushes improvement. What is your realistic counterfactual?
The counterfactual is the status quo where we have amazing players who push their limits, who you have a team dominate a league because of pure talent rather because of investment. You have players like start to win because they put in this effort. There are clashes, there are uncertainties. Oh no, a player's hurt. Oh my gosh, these two players these two teams are going up against each other. Only one can get through to the next round. One's going to knock each other out of the league. Sports fans have investment directly towards teams, parasocial relationships with players. People have this investment. This harm is that you take it away from them. You take away this like people who play sport at quite a high level, like soccer, like Beckham and stuff. Like this is like their career. You like actively harm their career, their chances of getting their income throughout like their sport. You actively like hurt entertainment. And as I will go on to say in how clubs face backlash, you actively hurt these clubs. Okay, we've said constantly throughout this debate that there are less viewers watching the sport, but what does this mean? Less viewers watching the sport means that there are like less seats being bought at matches, which means less revenue towards clubs. Less like people buying into streams that are like being broadcast of these sports. This means like there might be dwindling interest. They might not like have like lower level versions of the sport get streamed because like they might not be like, oh, at a major level it isn't that bought into. But it just like very much hinders club income. Please note how I've also said like fans are usually very emotionally invested and attached to players and clubs. This means like individuals are really disappointed when the club that they have been like supporting since they were young has now had like their two best players bought off them, and now they're like, oh my gosh, my club is like actually really bad at playing, and it's not a fault of my club, it's a fault of those people who bought it. And these, like, you've seen how soccer fans, like, send death threats, like, have, like, riots in the street after, like, World Cups and stuff. This, like, shows that, like, the worst case is that these, like, players and clubs can face, like, threats, they can face backlash, they can face, like, physical and emotional harm. But, like, even at, like, just, like, not as a harmful level, they just probably face, like, a lot of people being mean to them online, which can just, like, hurt them mentally. But note this like probably happens to both the super teams and the clubs that have had like basically their star players stolen from them. When like super like team gets messages like why didn't you have loyalty to your club and instead moved? And note that this is so harmful because it like also challenges the foundation of sport. Like it hurts also as I've said, hurts the individuals who aren't on the super team's chances of like sponsorship and stuff. And all these harms can lead to even worse harms, which are like laws and policies getting put in place on these sports associations, which can then hinder these like sports players' ability to move, ability to change clubs. And it can also hurt them by like clubs putting on really harsh contracts when they're rookies to basically keep them locked into their area to make sure they can't move and join a super team. All of this is which is really harmful if they have a dispute or they want to quit or other things happen. All of these things financially and mentally hurt players, clubs, and individuals watching, and this is why the moot shall stand.
Super teams don't harm sport. They push it to evolve and give players the freedom to choose their destiny. In my speech first, I'll be giving a few rebuttals to the other side, and then I'll be adding more onto my teammates' point about how this improves the popularity of the sport and how this brings out athletes' full potentials. Our opponents have talked about how there would be unfair financial advantages for super teams, but so government says that super teams have unfair collaboration, but collaboration is celebrated in every other profession. We don't mind top scientists for working together or elite doctors for joining the same hospital. Does it make it unfair because other hospitals have less qualified doctors? No, the conditions of a place decides how many talented people are there. The top players should play together to keep on improving themselves, inspiring other teams to also train harder instead of relying on one good player in their team, improving the overall quality of their teams. Only when there is a high competition will the sports world actually advance instead of just being the same three moves and goals that will eventually bore the audience. Sports should not be the only industry where excellence is punished for cooperating. Allowing players to choose success over quote unquote keeping the game fair respects them as people and not entertainment tools. They want to keep athletes as a character on their screen, not a real person that wants self-improvement and success in their career. Plus, large market teams have always had more money, stronger branding, and better sponsorships, long before the rise of modern super teams. So blaming super teams for this financial imbalance is illogical. Even if we accept their point that there will be a team that dominates the whole league, at least we give them the freedom of choice to pick a better life and salary for themselves. They've also talked about how there would be only two good players, but we doubt that out of so many players all coming from different countries would only build one or two teams. There would definitely be multiple super teams that create high intensity matches and competition. There are also different categories they're competing in, such as the U18, U20. So there are many super teams out of each category, and a lot of teams would have a chance. They've also talked about how a lot of people would be mean online, but there are mean people regardless, and in fact, they may get more backlash on their side because fans think that they're taking the star player down with with their lack of skill, and plus this impact is low, so it doesn't really matter. Now I'll be moving on to talking more about our own point about how this improves the popularity of a sport. No one wants to watch boring sports where out of the 22 players, only 2 or 3 of them are actually doing anything. That makes the sport less exciting and anticlimactic, selling less tickets and making less money, making every team lose out on money instead of just a few. Intense games and more
Point of information,
globalization leads
madam.
to broadcasting deals, sponsorships, and merchandise sales. This overall makes more money and funds for the sport, increasing the popularity for sports such as water polo. Sports exist in the global entertainment
Point of information,
market.
madam.
Wait, later. Super teams filled with recognizable stars act as entry points for new fans. A casual viewer in another country is far more likely to start watching a league because of a dominant, powerful team than because of a balanced out competition. A balanced league with no dominant force produces many games but few moments. A league with super teams produces a lot of iconic moments, which is a lot harder to produce when the prodigies are spread out. I'll take that POI.
Now, when you say we have more than one super team, as stated in your first substantive speech, isn't that the same thing as what you stated, where there's only 3 good people in the entire league? Doesn't your own logic contradict in on itself?
No, I was responding to your point where you said there were only I was talking about in a team, not the entire league. So if they collect multiple superstars from each team, then obviously there would be multiple super teams. And now I'll be continuing on to my speech. These teams also inspire future stars. Young athletes are inspired by watching the highest possible level of sport. They see how exciting their team could be. They get motivated of becoming like them one day. This increases the new players that will join the sport, providing the sport with long-term growth and more financial and more money for everyone. Now I'll be talking about how this brings out athletes' full potentials. Imagine this: soccer prodigy, a rising star, a genius even, having the chance of challenging the greatest soccer player, and yet they are stuck in their own national league that performs awfully. How is it fair that how good of an athlete's career is decided upon the place that they're born in, and we believe only with super teams will these players get the pay and salary they deserve. In some countries, sports aren't valued as much, so there are less funds put into the system. They get less training, worse equipment, worse coaches, etc., etc. This then brings more representation for these countries who are unknown in the sports world. Super teams also form because players exercise their freedom of choice. This empowers athletes rather than binding them to poorly manage franchises. Athletes have short careers. Injuries can end their careers overnight. Winning matters. In their short time of their prime, they should perform with the best players and the best teammates. They should reach their full potential. Being able to actually choose the team that they want to play in is a very important part of their career because their careers are short. And if we choose to keep prodigies spread out into different teams, they often lose, never actually being able to reach the best version of themselves. It's very important for athletes to actually have the freedom of choice, and that's in super teams will ensure that. Only with super teams will they actually have a choice in who they
No,
want to play with and have a fair pay for their talent. I'll take that POI.
isn't what you're describing just currently normal sports leagues? I feel like where the differentiation between Super Leagues falls is it's like one or two individual teams buying up all the best players rather than like a multitude of good teams switching between lots of good players.
No, in the status quo, it is a team with like one or two good players, but they're all spread out. What super teams are you're putting those good players into one team. But obviously, there wouldn't only be like I don't know, 11 good players. There would obviously be many different good players, and and all the players will choose different super teams looking at like the pay that they'll get and like the conditions in the contract. So many of these teams will form, and the teams right now lack that intensity that the super teams bring. So that's why they're different. This debate is not just about entertainment value. It's about labor rights and personal autonomy. So in my speech, I firstly have rebutted all our opponents' points, and I have added more onto my teammates' point about how this would improve the popularity of the sport and bring more money for all of the teams. And then we would actually be able to bring out the athletes' full potential and giving good athletes in their short time of their career a freedom of choice. Thank you.
Judge, as proposition whip, my job is not to bring you new ideas, but to tell you how to evaluate this debate and why, once you weigh impacts properly, super teams have clearly done more harm than good. This round does not hinge on whether super teams look exciting for a few seasons. It hinges on whether they undermine the foundations that make sport meaningful: competition, belief, and sustainability. On that question, the proposition wins, and I will tell you why. Now, firstly, I would like to do some framing. Opposition wants this debate to be about excellence, star power, revenue growth, and elite collaboration, but that framing is indeed incomplete. The correct framing is this. The framing that we propose is this. Does sport still function when winning becomes structurally concentrated among a small group of teams? If most teams enter a season knowing they cannot win, then sport becomes performance theater, not competition. Opposition obviously never answers this. Now I'd like to move on to clashes. Our first clash is competitive balance versus, well, dominance is interesting, of course. Then this is the heart of the debate. Opposition claims that dominance creates iconic moments. Fans want to watch the best together, and competition still exists in tactics and of execution. Now, this is extremely misleading. This argument fails because competition is not about how well the best play. It is about whether outcomes are genuinely contestable. Super teams hoard talent, which leads to predictable champions, repetitive playoff outcomes, and seasons that feel decided before they have begun. That kills the core appeal of sport. Uncertainty. It kills the core appeal of sport. Competition. I'd like to give an example. In the United States, college football is one of the most prominent sport leagues, but there have been no super teams because we watch sport not because of dominance. We watch sport to watch the competition, to support our home teams. And if our home teams can't even compete, then what's the point of watching sport? And when we stop watching sport, the impact of that is that sports leagues will fail to make money. And now let me give you another example of when they fail to make money, which has been brought up but never addressed by my first speaker, the Kevin Durant and Warriors example. When Kevin Durant joined the Warriors, the title race collapsed, competitive balance disappeared, and fan interest shifted from who will win by how much. That is not healthy sport. That is dominance without tension. Opposition never explains why reduced uncertainty is good for competition. Now I'd like to tell you why proposition wins the first clash. Sport thrives when talent is distributed. More teams have hope, and success is earned, not concentrated. Super teams destroy that balance. That harm is structural, not emotional. Now I'd like to move on to the second clash. Our second clash is between revenue and ecosystem damage. Opposition leans heavily on money. They say that super teams boost viewership, sponsorships rise, and sharing Revenue sharing benefits everyone. That sounds logical, but it ignores what actually sustains sports leagues. Why this argument collapses? Money cannot replace fan identity. Money cannot replace fan loyalty, local identity, competitive relevance, and super teams concentrate media coverage, sponsorship attention, and star narratives. Small market teams may receive shared revenue, but they still face empty seats, declining merchandise sales, and disengaged fan bases. A league cannot survive long term when most teams only exist to lose. Opposition never proves that revenue fixes disengagement or why money replaces hope. This is why proposition wins, because sustainable sport requires engaged fans across the league, meaningful matches beyond finals, and relevance for underdogs. Super teams hollow this out. Now our third clash is player development versus stars raise standards. Opposition claims that young players learn from stars. Elite environments improve development. Dominance pushes others to innovate. But if you've ever studied econ, this ignores opportunity cost. It fails because player development requires minutes, time, responsibility, room to fall and grow. Super teams block young players, as what happened in the 2016 Warrior season. Yet, yes, training with stars help, but you don't become a star by never playing. Opposition never explains how future stars emerge, or how depth is managed, or how pipelines stay healthy when opportunities are hoarded at the top. Now I'm going to tell you why proposition also wins in the third class. Distributed talent. It creates more talents, strengthens league depth, sustains long-term quality. Super teams concentrate excellence and starve the future. Now I'd like to move on to my fourth clash. The fourth clash is between fan engagement and people still watch. Opposition repeatedly say fans still tunes in, but this misses the point entirely. This is insufficient because fans watching highlights is not the same as fans investing emotionally. Super teams cause neutral fans to bandwagon, loyal fans to disengage, and local identity to erode. Sports becomes global, flashy, but locally hollow. Opposition never answers why underdog fans should accept permanent irrelevance, or why community loyalty should be sacrificed for spectacle. Proposition wins because sport survives on belief, rivalry, and community identity. So does college football. Super teams trade these away for short-term hype. Now I'd like to move on to comparative weighing. On probability, competitive imbalance is guaranteed. Talent holding is structural, and fan disengagement is predictable. That's why proposition wins on probability. On scale, it affects entire leagues, harms competition, development, and fandom, and lasts decades. That's why proposition wins on scale. On time horizon, opposition offers short-term excitement, while proposition protects long-term league health. Judges must prioritize long-term sustainability over short-term spectacle. Now I'd like to move on to some of the points that opposition has dropped or never answered. Proposition never answered why predictability doesn't kill belief. They never answered how young pipelines recover under super teams. They never answered why small market fans should stay invested, and they never answered how dominance avoids becoming a monopoly. These silences matter in the judging of the debate. Honorable judge, super teams may look powerful, but power is not health. They hoard talent, destroy competitive balance, weaken development, and alienate the most loyal fans of the sport. Sport should reward excellence without eliminating opportunity. And when we weigh all impacts, it is clear super teams have done more harm than good. For all those reasons, that is why we are so proud to propose. Thank you for your time.
Side opposition want you to fear a future where super teams turn sport into a world where money decides everything and competition dies. But that world already exists, and super teams are not the cause. What super team actually do then is make excellence visible, competition meaningful, and systems stronger, while driving growth in the long term. Before going to clashes, 2 framing points, right? Firstly, evaluate based on long-term system outcomes, not temporarily discomfort. Because I think what opposition tries to do heavily on this debate is they focus heavily on short-term imbalance, a few seasons of dominance, or the frustration of fans on weaker teams. But that is not how we should evaluate whether something is good or harmful, because I think super teams produces benefits that persist far beyond a single season. A higher standard of playing, improved coaching and youth programs, increased revenue, and global attention. Opposition side asks you to weigh temporary frustration as if as if it actually outweighs these systematic improvements. And I think obviously this kind of systematic improvements that would told you down the bench is simply much more important, right? But also I think if a system produces long-term growth, innovation, and excitement, we must judge by those outcomes, not a little bit of discomfort, right? But at the same time, I think all of these kind of situation that side proposition is telling you, I think all of this kind of situation actually already occurs in the status quo, as we see PSG in League One and McLaren in F1, right? This reframing simply turns their fairness argument into a false metric where imbalance for a few seasons is insignificant compared to decades of growth and system improvement, which I'm gonna focus more on later on, right? But second point then, about how competition exists to drive excellence, not equal outcomes, right? Because I think opposition also assumes that the purpose of sport is to ensure everyone have an equal chance to win. That is a fundamental misunderstanding. The entire purpose of competition is to actually push performance to its highest level, to inspire participants, and to grow the ecosystem sustainably. Super teams serve this purpose. They concentrate top talent, produce the highest possible level of performance, and force everyone else to innovate or adapt. A league where everyone is equal might feel fairer, but produces lower standards and reduces the audience's interest. By reframing the goal of competition in this way, we invert opposition's narrative. Super teams are not destroying fairnesses, they are fulfilling sport's true purpose. First clash then on super teams make sport about money but not marriage. Opposition side told you that how super teams turn sport into a financial arm race where the richest team always win. This is deeply flawed. Firstly, that money have always mattered in sport. Facilities, coaching, scouting, and player development require investments. Opposition cannot claim banning super teams suddenly just removes money from the equation. They cannot claim that banning super teams just suddenly make everything fair, right? Because I think that is simply not true. Secondly, money alone does not guarantee success. If it did, we would see the same team winning forever. In reality, super teams fail frequently due to injuries, tactical mismatches, internal chemistry problems, and aging players. Just as you see Manchester United in 2008 when they actually won both the Premier League and they else. I think it's but they still actually ended up failing in a few years after, right? You see Chelsea in 2012 where they also won the Premier League, but they won't actually consistent in winning that Premier League, because I think other sports clubs and other sports teams are actually also improving at the same time, right? But thirdly, I think many super teams exist because of player choice, not just financial resources. Elite players choose to join teams when they can maximize performance, learn from each other, and win championship. This is merit clustering, not simply money dominance. Now, what is the comparative then? I think opposition simply offers a fantasy world where financial inequality disappears. But in reality, money always exists in sport, and what matters is how talent is applied. Super teams reward strategy, skill, and cooperation. The very qualifies that define marriage, right? Second clash then, about how super teams destroy competitive balance. Opposition claims that super teams make league predictable and unbalanced. This misunderstands both the nature of dominance and the purpose of competition, right? Firstly, the first response then is that fans don't just watch to see the winners, they watch narratives. Because I think what opposition is assuming is that they assume that fans only care about a one-side context, but in reality, sport is about storylines, it's about drama and identity, it's about history, not just outcomes. Because, Josh, Manchester United have literally been 16th in the Premier League. Why do they still have so many fans? It's because of the history, it's because of their storyline, and it's because of their drama. But secondly, I think even two weaker teams have fans, rivalries, and stake, right? Because they have local pride, they have history, or the chance for an upset, right? Because, George, literally, Team China is one of the worst football team in the entire world. You still see that they have fans. You still see these bad clubs in China having fans, right? But secondly, I think super teams actually raise overall viewership, including small team games, right? Because I think when the super team exists, all games become more interesting by comparison. Fans track smaller teams because they could one day challenge the super teams. Exposure grows through league marketing, televised matches, and sponsorships that only exist because of the elite teams, right? You see, in League One, without PSG, nobody is going to care about League One, right? Plus, I think obviously and ultimately, we're the only side that actually cares about, and we're the only side that actually benefits these leagues as a whole, right? But thirdly, the obsessed and cyclical dominance simply keeps leagues exciting, right? Because I think dominance is temporary. In injuries, the tactical mistakes, or aging superstars ensure no teams win forever, right? Because Josh, note here, you see in 2025, like you see PSG as one of the best teams. However, you still see Chelsea defeating them in the US, right? Why is that? It's because they don't have a good tactic, but Chelsea actually knows their tactic, and Chelsea was actually able to go against their tactic, right? But also, I think, like, this simply proves that viewer engagement persists even when some teams are weaker, because there is always a chance for dramatic upsets, right? But at the same time, I also want to note here that I think their characterization of like what these like, the leagues and what this kind of sport actually looks like is simply really, really false, because just as in soccer, like when there's no way there's only 11 good players, right? Like in the entire world, there was at least like 20, there's like 40 good teams and 40 high level teams, right? And when there's 11 in each team, there's 440, and how much club can that make, right? At least 20 clubs, right? So that's obviously, it's not like a scenario where they tell you about how like two teams dominating everything, right? But lastly, what do you think the comparative look like? I think opposition suggests banning super team will make all matches equally interesting, but that's false, because I think artificial parity reduces narrative stakes. If every team is like, the same, fans won't have historic rivalries or storylines, and I think super teams simply create tension, it creates aspiration, right? Thus, conclusion is really, really simple. Conclusion is really, really simple. Super teams are not a threat to sport. They define the best of sport. Money has always existed. Imbalance corrects itself over time. What lasts is excellence, inspiration, and system-wide growth. Thus, this is the clearest opposition battle ever.
This debate should be judged upon which side is able to bring more fame to sport and gives the sport the legacy and fame, which is by pushing the sport and quality of playing to the next level. That is what gives the sport to be even able to advance forward on the stage. So when government side thinks that somehow letting everything stay in place like the status quo and still allowing teams or the sport to remain in the same place will help these teams in this way, they have simply given us no counterfactual that is as effective as ours. In this reply, I will do two things. Firstly, analyze the clashes and actually be the first side to compare it on our worst case scenario, and secondly, weigh the trade-offs from both sides. Firstly, on the clashes, what do fans truly want? Domination or fairness on all sides. That we believe that fairness is black and white. The thing is, even when there is domination from super teams, even if the audience does not really want to watch repetitive success, what we do bring is higher ratings and greater interest that bring in more fame, which is the only way in which your underdog team that you will want to win will have more motivation. There is a reason why dominance slowly shifts. New innovations comes in things like training, talented stars ultimately retires, and dominance always shifts even within sports with these super teams. I would also like to point out, even if they said what is true where domination in sports is boring, I think we have proved repeatedly as to why huge audiences still tune in into sports like F1, sports like badminton and table tennis where China dominates, when they know a college team is going to win in swimming each year. That simply doesn't make any sense if people know who's going to win. It's because of the legend that these super teams leave behind, as our whip has proved. There are several assumptions that proposition has made in this debate. Firstly, fans only love equal competition, and secondly, a specific team is going to dominate for the rest of the history of sport, both in which we have proved is false. Now, the second clash is, what is the impact of sponsorships and money and whether or not it's going to be equally distributed? We believe that proposition side has completely underestimated the impact that even a small amount of money or a small amount of fame has on specific clubs or teams. As our whip has already said, fans love a narrative. They love it when one team has a more destructive state of mind. They love it when they love an underdog narrative, and when somehow they might win, these underdog teams benefit massively, because if fans truly do not like domination, they would simply just, first of all, just choose another team that is an underdog that they want to win, because that is the effect of a super team. Now, moving on to the weighing, Judge, we believe that even if we lose all of these two clashes from above, we still win this debate because we're able to give talented players an actual chance to achieve the success that they have already dreamed of, and we are able to keep the legacy and the legend of the sport alive by pushing the quality of the sport to the next level. So let's just compare them then. On proposition side, they focus on the short-term equality, but they're never allowing the sport to have a chance to push it to the next quality of playing. That is simply the purpose of sports, as I've already stated in my first speech. Fans do not fall in love with sports because everyone is equal. They fall in love with the highest level of competition and pushing the sports to its limits. So when you break a world record, when you start dominating, we have explained all down our bench that that level of impact is never going to be achievable on proposition side. Now, on our side, we trade off a few short-term seasons with domination for the long-term prosperity and legacy of the sport, with increased viewerships. And even if there is an imbalance in these distribution of resources and sponsorships, we have proved many other alternative reasons as to why we should still win, such as benefiting these individually talented people and leaving behind the legacy of sports to begin with. And finally, simply the main purpose of the sport, which is to push the quality of the playing to the next level and making sure that the competitiveness and of the sport does not stay in one place. So for all the reasons above, please give the ballot to op.
3 things in the speech. Firstly, on super teams, and secondly, on how it affects players and clubs, and then thirdly, on overall viewership. Okay, firstly, on the definition of super teams, it's been disputed throughout this debate. I'm hopefully here to clear it up again. Sure, in status quo, good players are just passed around, and what we're debating is a super team is a team filled with the best players. Having multiple of having so many is just a high level league. This just looks like a high level football league where people are playing. A super team is probably more likely to have only 1 or 2 and are very high players. It wasn't illustrated how it's most likely. Well, we illustrated it first, how it's most likely a very rich and notoriety individual who will just buy up all the best players and use contracts that are very appealing to bring them in. But even if this doesn't happen, we will prove to you how even if it is a league filled with heaps and heaps of good players and the super teams are illustrated as they say, how harms are still existent in and how the harms outweigh the good. Okay, on to players and clubs. We said many things on this that they didn't really properly engage with. Firstly, on the backlash individuals face when joining super teams and leaving home teams. We said how this looks when now their home team versus a super team and they get at worst case death threats, but at lower level just bashed on social media. All of this can affect these individuals. But we also saw at first how these individuals throughout the whole league probably now struggle with sponsorship when there is probably more interest focused on the super teams within the league rather than lower level teams, but also competition for sponsorship within these teams. But thirdly, which is one of the more important points, placed third, first and second, are the harsh contracts that get put in place to keep players that get put on them as rookies coming in, where they get these harsh contracts that make it really hard to leave so they can't join a super team, or make it really hard for them to leave a super team, and the contract sort of war that comes there. This happens to this just isn't effects on clubs. This players, this affects clubs as well, in that it becomes a financial dealing rather than about the actual sport itself. And sure, this doesn't exist sure, this exists at a smaller scale without super teams, but the relevance of this has came into existence because of super teams and because of individual teams buying it up to a state of it being unfair. And this can affect, this is so important because this is their financial well-being, this is these sports players' jobs, this is these clubs' jobs, and their mental well-being when they are put under public scrutiny. So note that even if we don't win on the viewership, we at least have these unique harms, and we feel we should weigh these players and clubs very highly, and the harms that we've illustrated to you throughout this debate on them very highly because they are individuals very uniquely impacted and this is their life. Okay, on viewership, they said they have viewership at the highest level and they will still get because they're sport on the highest level and they have history. We said quite a lot of the time this isn't untrue because we believe that these super teams almost illustrate themselves very unfairly, there's a very big unfair advantage. It takes out predictability and makes less iconic matches and angers people because it feels unfair, and people just want to watch really good sport where there's competition, and all of this is what gets viewings and that drops. But even if and their worst case is that all of this drops and now suddenly clubs and stuff don't get engagement and there's all those financial harms as well. But their best case is they get very similar to what we get already. People buy into sport, people watch sport, people enjoy sport. What they do get, however, is now all the inequalities that come with the financial harm that are like burdened on them by and the lack of enjoyment and the lack of variables that still get put on them. And we believe that even one of these harms happen and manifest, this shows that it's more harm than good. This is why the moot shall stand.